All right, good morning. Good morning. So yeah, it's 8:30, so we're going to get started with day two here. And just want to welcome you. Hopefully everyone had a good night and a good drive over this morning, if that was the case. This is Room C, Climate, Carbon, and Soil Health. This session's been organized by Dr. Rafiq Islam with OSU Extension, and also Warren Dick, retired soil scientist with Ohio State University as well. Just as a reminder, make sure you turn your cell phones down or off so we're not interrupting the speakers today. In the program, you'll also see an announcement about a conservation and drainage ditches and conversation that's happening today at 4:30 over at the inn. So this is a research project at Ohio State University looking for farmer landowner participants to join in this conversation. So registration for this, you can sign up in the registration right over there in the lunchroom there. So if there aren't any questions, I think we'll go ahead and get started with our first talk this morning. We want to welcome Warren Dick, again, OSU soil scientist, retired, maybe, sort of, right? Who's going to give an overview of climate change effects on soil carbon and soil health. Here you go.
Thank you, Aaron. And yeah, my wife said I get an F- for retirement. So, and actually, I have to say, I did not do I didn't really do any of this session. Dr. Islam did it all. Mentored, yeah, many years ago, probably. So my talk is about carbon primarily to kind of set the stage. I don't have a lot of numbers. It's more, there's some numbers, but, and how it's related to no-till, that sort of thing. So I talk about, just to start, 3 eras of agriculture. And did you know no-tillage is the oldest type of agriculture in the world? This is a picture from Asia where they do slash and burn. They just cut the trees, they burn it, and then they just take a stick, put the seed in the ground, and let it grow. That's the way agriculture basically, I think, started for the most part. But then tillage became very much a part of agriculture for many years. And so I called the first era of agriculture the mechanical era. So this is from the Egyptian pyramids. Even back then, they have the oxen and the plow. And for thousands of years, my father was the same way. You know, you got to plow that soil. You got to do that soil. That's the only way you can grow a crop. Well, that continued till about World War II, or shortly after. I called this the chemical era. And I remember Glover Triplett and Dave Van Doren. They were the early pioneers of no-tillage in Ohio. And they were, when atrazine came on, they were looking at how to control weeds. And so Roundup and all these now for many years was the chemical era. But now we're in the biological era. Everything is biology. This was my background and how I spent most of my career in this area, but all kinds of, biopesticides, bioherbicides, biodigesters, bioactivity, biofertilizers. That seems to be where things are today as much as anything. This is, you can see this talk, but Rolf Derpsch is from Uruguay. He's a great proponent of no-tillage. He has this PowerPoint slide, deck of slides, the importance of green manure cover crops and crop rotation in the no-tillage systems, and just a lot of good stuff. Maybe if you have time, you can pull it up on your computer and look at it. But he makes this comment. And there's pros and cons. We'll look at it. But almost all the advantages of the no-till system come from permanent soil cover and not necessarily from not tilling the soil. Ooh, that doesn't sound right at a no-till conference, does it? Well, let me expound on that a little bit. And a lot of the data that I'll be talking about and some come from our long-term no-tillage plots that I managed for 30-some years. I think now they started in 62, so now they're 62 years. Continuous no-till. They have been sampled hundreds of times, so much data. I'm going to show some of the data. Some of it's a little old because, you know, I did retire a few years ago, but Glover Triplett, he was there when I started in 1980 at Ohio State. And when he retired, I was given the job of making some comments. So what I did, I went to the toy store. I bought a little plow, toy plow, and I gave it to him. I said, Dr. Van Doren, you need to keep this because you have made this a museum piece. So these long-term plots, they're Worcester and Hoytville are the two I'm going to show. Worcester is a silt loam. Northwest Ohio, it's more of a clay soil. Organic matter differs between the two sites. So they are quite contrasting, but they chose, Glover Triplett and Dave Van Doren chose these areas specifically to have a range of soil types when they started their no-till research. They also looked at, as part of that, crop rotation. There's a 3-year rotation. I'm only going to look at the plow till versus the no-till. The chisel till has kind of changed a little bit over the years, but the plow or full inversion treatment and the no-tillage treatment have been maintained for 62 years. So if you want to see a contrasting difference in soils between long-term no-till and long-term plow till, I gave lots of demonstrations over the years at these plots. You don't need a fancy spectrophotometer to see the difference in carbon, for example. You just pull up a handful, you can see, look at the dark color difference. You don't need any sort of fancy grid to look at how many earthworms. You can see all the holes and that sort of thing. I did help set up an endowment when I was still active. So some money has come in over the years. I donated, other people, Glover and Dave Van Doren, Glover Triplett, donated some funds to start a fund to endow these plots to keep them going, because university always wants to put pressure on. You need to use these plots for something more productive than just growing no-till year by year. I said, no, don't sacrifice these things. So looking at some of the data I had, the difference between no-till and plow-till, and when you're talking about carbon, carbon is related to inputs versus how much of that input is evolved from the soil as carbon dioxide. So generally, the more biomass you grow, the more carbon you're going to put in your soil in the long term. And so we were looking at, you know, how does no-till and plow-till differ as far as crop yield? And this was actually grain, but there is a relationship between grain and biomass, root and above ground. And I looked at the 10 highest years of corn grain under different tillage treatments. And when you have very good years, at least the years I was involved in these plots, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between no-till and plow-till, because the climate, the soil, the rains, everything came at the right time and everything looked good. If you look at the rotation, however, there was a significant difference where we had, and I'm here looking at a 3-year, corn every 3 years to corn, oats, meadow, corn every 2 years, or corn every year. And you can see at Worcester, whether you did continuous corn or corn every other year, there wasn't any difference. But if we did corn only 1 out of 3 years, there did seem to be a yield boost to that. In Hoytville, the continuous corn was always the worst. And then the 3-year was the best. And that's kind of changed. In the last few years I was doing these plots, we didn't see that yield penalty as much for continuous corn as we did in the early years. Now, if we look at the lowest years, it's interesting how, again, if we look at the tillage, no tillage at those poor years just really outshined the other tillage treatments. And that's not, I think many of you probably know that and have read about that. When you have a dry year, when you have that nice organic matter in the soil, storing water, better infiltration, you just get better yields in a dry year. And if it's a very wet year, you get better infiltration, drainage. And so at Worcester especially, we saw a very nice, on the poor years, no tillage really shined. Not so much at Hoytville. you see there's a little bit of a yield increase. But again, I think this was partially due to those poor years where the early years were continuous no-tillage, which this is continuous no-till all the years, just really was crappy yield on those soils initially. So let me back up. So if you want to build carbon in soil, one thing you have to do, you have to have good yields. You have to get the carbon in the soil. All right, so the corn yield under all tillage systems at both sites increased with time. And we see that continuously, better hybrids, better fertility, all that. And remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, when you start into a new system like no tillage, sometimes many of you are you know, experts now in the no tillage system, but when you got started, maybe it took a little bit of time. And we see it does take time for soil properties to change when you go from a plow tillage to a no tillage system. Growing corn 1 year out of 3 increased yields, while 2-year rotation affected corn yields much less. And so one way we can get that kind of the same thing as a 3-year rotation is introducing cover crops. That's introducing a kind of a break crop, like a third crop in the rotation in a sense. During the 10 years of highest corn yield, tillage had little effect, but the 3-year rotation effect remained evident. And during the 10 years of lowest corn yield, no tillage yielded significantly better than the other tillages at Worcester, but not at Hoytville. The 3-year rotation was better than the other rotations at both sites, and the 2- and 3-year rotations were better than continuous corn at Hoytville. Now, this, when you go from, we're talking carbon, and you change management, these programs, you know, that try to pay farmers on building carbon. If you go from a plow tillage system to a no tillage system, you might have a kind of an initial increase in carbon, but then you eventually come to a new equilibrium. So these people that are just starting out, they capture all this carbon here, whereas a farmer that's already been doing no tillage for many years, he's already up here. He's not going to see a lot of change. So the talk is, you know, you need to provide some way for those long-term no-tillers to get benefit, economic benefit from the years they've been doing things right, so to speak. So let me look at a few other bits of data. This is from Hoytville. After 18 years, 36 years. I kept it here because 36 years, we already saw what I want to tell you about here. Many times people would say, oh, you know, if you look at no tillage and the carbon is increasing, it's only on the surface. If you go down deeper, you know, you don't get as much carbon under no tillage than under plow tillage. And that's what you see. You do get a crossover. That's quite common in those early years. But look here. Keep with it. If you keep with it, that carbon increase is all the way down the profile under no tillage. Even though you haven't tilled it mechanically, you've tilled it through earthworms, root channels, all these other things that help bring that carbon down. And then once it's down there, it doesn't degrade as quickly. And you begin to build. So this talk I used to hear about, oh, no tillage, building carbon only on the surface, but you lose it in the subsurface. Keep with it. Rome wasn't built in a day. All right. Then we did some of my last students, we went to our long-term no-till plots, and you say, oh, Warren, what did you do? You destroyed it. Well, we did it at the bottom of the plot. So we made sure we didn't destroy the plots themselves. We dug some transects, and we had one of our long-term professors in soil mapping and that sort of thing come out, and he did a profile analysis for us. And so here's at the Worcester site. This was after 44 years now. You can see carbon, organic carbon content And the plow tillage started about 1.2 at the surface, goes down into the different soil layers. After 44 years, look at more than double right at the surface, and it's down all the way, even higher all the way down. And what else do you see in that picture? You see some channels from earthworms, don't you? Do you see those here where we plow? No, because the plow always destroys the earthworm home. And if you had to build your home every other year or so, you probably would just go somewhere else, right? And that's what the worms do. This is at Hoytville. Again, at the surface, about 2.5%. That was initially when we started. Now, right at the surface, 5%. Continues to go down at a higher rate. See all those channels there. It's a healthy soil. A lot of biology in there. And I'll show you some data about that. If we looked at carbon, just as in the top 12 inches, you see where we plowed, it basically stayed the same, maybe went down a little bit, but we're building carbon at the surface, 12 inches. And that's all I put on this, but it does extend down deeper. This is at Worcester. The amount of carbon, this was the original when it was a plow tillage system, then it went to no-till. You can see that this is at Worcester, the increase, the total amount of carbon. This was adjacent wood, so this would be like the natural system when the pioneers came and those wood lots were still there. So we've reversed the soil property to be like it was in the original. And the grass is a grass alleyway we just took as a comparison. This is at Hoytville. The original, this is the wooded area. So we're back to almost what the original was. It's higher than the no-till. We haven't got back all the way to what it was in the adjacent plow lot. But we're getting there. This is after 44 years. If I had more recent data, I'm sure that would be closer between the two. Now, what we did, one of my students also took some soil samples and she put acrylic or whatever they do and then cut them really thin with a diamond knife and put them under a microscope. And you can see this is Worcester no-till. Look at all the open space there. This is a piece of plant residue. The bacteria like to grow in these open spaces. And so a lot of biology there and a lot of aeration and water infiltration, all those nice things that you want to see in your soil. And look at this. What do you see? All kinds of macropores, all kinds of holes. This is at 12 inches depth. When you get a rainfall onto a well-maintained no-tillage soil, that water tends to go down. It doesn't run off nearly as quickly because of all these holes, earthworm holes, old root channels, all those things. Now, I've worked a lot in gypsum in the last few years, and I've talked about that here at this conference. I have one slide. This is actually work that was done in South Africa, but I like it because it does illustrate what we found. Because in Ohio, you have soils that have been limed, so that the surface maybe 6-8 inches. The pH is 6.5, 7 in that range, 6.5, 6.7. But below, you might have some acidic soil. And roots don't like acid soils. It's not because of the acidity per se, it's because in an acid soil, you have this aluminum, 3+, you see it says toxic. And that is highly inhibitory for root growth. So what gypsum does, it reacts with that toxic aluminum, makes a non-toxic aluminum sulfate, doesn't really change the soil pH very much. But because it's removed that toxic aluminum 3+, those roots are much happier growing in that soil than they were before. And so you see here a soil that's been limed. The surface soil pH has been increased to where it should be. All the roots are where? In that limed portion of the soil. You put gypsum in it, you still have that with lime, you put the two together, you still have that higher pH at the surface because of lime, but because of that gypsum, which does move down, it's 200 times more soluble than lime, it moves down into the profile, removes the toxic aluminum. Look at all the roots there. In July, August, where do you want your roots? You want them deep, right here. So they can get moisture, they can get nutrients, they can feed that plant. I wrote a bulletin, I think I have it show, yeah, here. Gypsum has this agricultural amendment, a lot of colored pictures. I was told by the extension people, you can get this through OSU, that it was one of their top selling bulletins of all time, other than the agronomy guide. Agronomy guide is definitely number one. Now, a few other slides. Nature's laws of declining soil productivity and conservation agriculture. The foundation of modern conservation agriculture, we are in a conservation agriculture program, has three basic principles. And this is again by Rolf Dirks from Uruguay, made this. He said, for a good conservation system, which builds carbon, builds soil quality, you need these three things: continuous, no, or minimum soil disturbance. And you could probably put in there strip tillage, I guess, would be fit in that. Permanent biomass soil cover through your plant residue, through cover crops, and biodiversity and crop rotations, all of which form the basis for the protection against degradation for sustaining productivity. So biodiversity through rotation or cover crops. Now, these people published this paper, and they made this statement. I'm going to try to unpack it a little bit because they got some pushback from it. We argue that no-till is beneficial for soil quality and adaptation of agriculture to climate change, but its role in mitigation is widely overstated. What does that mean? They're saying that no-tillage really doesn't do a lot of good, have a lot of impact as far as reducing CO2 levels in the atmosphere. But you should do no-tillage anyhow, because no-tillage helps adapt to hotter climates, drought, these extreme weather events. So there's a lot of advantages to doing no-tillage, but it's not because of the carbon sequesters per se. Now, there's some of that also, obviously, but that's not what they're saying. That's not the important thing. Well, the people that wrote that, they pushed back, and then they made this statement: reduce, so that, in academia, sometimes people get in arguments. So this was some of this tit for tat that was going on. So the people that wrote that article, they were criticized, and then they came back and they said, reduced tillage certainly has a role to play as one of the strategies contributing to global food security and the protection of soils, and thus to climate change adaptation through building agricultural systems that are more resilient. See, that's the word. It doesn't remove carbon so much from the atmosphere, but it makes your soils more resilient to climate and weather variability. In regions where no-till or reduced tillage is appropriate, it should be promoted on these grounds, but not on the basis of equivocal evidence for climate change mitigation. No-tillage can deliver significant benefit for farmers and sustainability in many, though not all situations, and they refer to table 1. Reduced greenhouse gas emissions are a small but important additional benefit, not the key policy driver for its adoption. Okay, so you might not agree with me on all this, but I think that the basic story is true. Then Johann Six, and well-known, this idea of mitigation, he's saying soils can have a impact about removing CO2, but it takes time. So he says the potential to mitigate global warming with no tillage management is only realized when practiced in the long term. Keep on keeping on. Then lastly, just a few slides. One of my very last students took these soils from these long-term no-tillage plots and did a lot of microbiology and biochemistry, and extracted the DNA and sequenced it, and we found all kinds of things. And whenever we would do this type of study, it's not maybe so much anymore, but when we were doing this in the 2015, 14, every time we would take a soil sample and sequence the DNA, we would find new organisms. There are thousands of species in soil that we never knew who they were. So when I would talk to my mother or my father, and they would ask me, well, what are you doing, Warren, in your research? I would tell them this way. I said, what we're doing was we're asking the soil microorganisms, who are you and what are you doing? Who you are and what is their function. So they did a lot of the who are you stuff, but they also looked at the function. So this is a ratio of no-till to plow-till, and the number of organisms that, based on the sequence, that were involved in nitrogen metabolism, more than 3 times under no-till. The amount of organisms involved in sulfur metabolism, 3.5 times more under no-till than our long-term plow-till. Hydrocarbon degradation, this is so important because this is what makes your humus when you break down your residues. Look at that, 4.2 times more under no-till. Methane metabolism, I'm going to get to that. This is my last. Methane is one of the greenhouse gases you all talk about, 23 times more potent than CO2. We see twice as many organisms involved in eating or degrading methane under no tillage than in plow tillage. So when you talk about greenhouse gases, it's not only CO2, we talk about methane. No tillage is a great system for reducing methane from soils. So the authors proposed, this is land management, 3 pathways to overcome shortcomings in the voluntary carbon markets, improve integrity of credits, and promote long-lasting change to achieve non-trivial climate mitigation and co-benefits from the land sector. So these are target major sources of land-based emission by increasing activities that reduce non-CO2 greenhouse gases, carbon, methane, and nitrous oxide. So this is the story one of my students did. We did over 50 years looking at a chronosequence of no-tillage soils, and all of these soils had a forest area adjacent to it, same soil type. So you can see the forest soils are known. It's well known. Those are those squares on the top. They are well known to have microorganisms that eat methane, that consume or degrade methane. Plow tillage is very poor at that. But as we increase no tillage, look at that. A straight line, we're getting close to what is in the natural forest system. How much time do I have left? Not very much. Yeah, about a minute. So promote longevity of low carbon, of low greenhouse gas land management, and ensuring that local relevant benefits accrue to local land uses. So, a farmer that's been doing this for a long time, he should get some acknowledgement benefit from it, and then encourage region-wide over individual project-based activities. Okay, I have 5 slides. I told you I was retired, and these are going to go really quick. I have some bookmarks there. Take them home. When I retired, I started a project in Ethiopia, Africa. Our project model is train a farmer, feed a nation. This one says better food, better life, but the motto is train a farmer, feed a nation. I'd love to be invited to your church or your place and talk about it. It's a strategic country in Africa, second most populous country in Africa. It's a very young country. Average age is median age is 19. Our mission was to impart environmental and agricultural knowledge and skills that will enable Ethiopians and other Africans to protect their environment and practice sustainable agriculture. My oldest brother said, Warren, you are a perfect person to do a project like this. You grew up on a farm in North Dakota. You have the educational background. You have the research background. So here I am. I'm not retired. This is our master plan. We have some buildings going up even now. And this is our web page and Facebook page. Thank you.